The mysterious restaurant. The crew asked Modem what he wanted to eat. Modem said to get the usual, and told the doctor to order for Tien. The doctor heard Modem whistling and told him to stop. Modem didn't believe in that stuff, but stopped to ease the doctor. They returned to the show. Before leaving, the doctor heard the black ant whistling and warned him to stop, saying it would attract ghosts. Modem dismissed it as superstition, but stopped to ease the doctor. The second caller shared a story from 10 years ago about X and Tong, university friends interning at a small radio station in the northeast. Their mentor, Pebua, took them to the station's old accommodation. Despite its poor condition, they cleaned it to make it livable. After a long day, X chatted with his girlfriend while Tong went to bed. Suddenly, X burst into Tong's room. The story happened 10 years ago during X and Tong's university days. They were friends interning at a radio station. Their mentor Pibwa was a staff member there. Pibwa showed them to the station's accommodation, a rundown house. They had to clean it. After a long day, X chatted with his girlfriend, while Tong went to bed. X invited Tong to eat. Tong hesitated but agreed. Tong noticed only woods along the roadside and suggested they return home. The station's accommodation was a rundown house. They had to help each other move in and clean it to make it livable. X chatted with his girlfriend, while Tong went to bed. As Tong was about to lie down, X burst in, inviting him to eat out. Tong hesitated but agreed. They rode their motorcycles down the road. Tong noticed only woods, making it hard to find food, so he suggested turning back. X insisted he saw an open restaurant, and Tong followed. Tong saw a roadside shrine, which made him uneasy. It was around midnight when Tong hesitated to eat with X. He agreed. They rode their motorcycles down the main road. After a while, Tong saw only woods, no food places, so he suggested turning back. X insisted he saw an open restaurant. Not wanting to leave X, Tong agreed to follow. After riding longer, Tong saw a shrine, feeling uneasy. Before he could persuade X, they found a restaurant in the woods. Entering, they felt something was off. However, X insisted that he had seen the restaurant that was open, and when he saw that he could not live without his friend, he agreed to drive after X. After driving for a while, he saw a shrine on the side of the road, and began to feel uneasy. Before Tong could persuade X again, they found a restaurant in the deserted woods. Inside, they felt something was off. The cook's strange gaze and the unusual wild dishes on the menu were unsettling. X insisted they try the food, unique to this place, unlike anything in Bangkok. Tong, uneasy, reluctantly agreed. While waiting, Tong saw the chef return with a bloody piece of meat. The odd behavior of the owners made Tong uncomfortable. He excused himself to the bathroom and heard cries for help, with blood streaming from a door. Startled, he screamed, bringing X to investigate, but everything Tong saw had vanished. As they argued about it, things took a turn. Tong felt uneasy about the restaurant. Unable to convince his friend, he stayed seated. After fidgeting, he excused himself to the bathroom. As he walked, he heard cries for help and saw blood from a door. Everything Tong saw had vanished. The owner's wife entered, listened, then opened the door where Tong saw blood. It was empty. The strange behavior of the uncle and aunt made Tong uneasy. After fidgeting, Tong went to the bathroom, but, walking back, he heard cries for help, with blood streaming from a door. Tong screamed, making X rush in, but when X arrived, everything vanished. While arguing if it was real, the aunt walked in. She listened calmly before going to the door. Opening it, they saw only a storage room. The aunt confirmed it was just equipment. They reluctantly returned to their table. Tong was shocked seeing the food looked like bloody meat. He wasn't used to such food, but X insisted he try it. The aunt approached. She listened to Tong and X, then opened the door to the room where Tong saw blood. It was just a storage room. They returned to their table. Tong was shocked by X's food, which looked like bloody meat. Tong hesitated, but X urged him to try it. As Tong lifted a spoonful, it turned into worms, making him scream and drop the spoon. X complained, but Tong insisted he saw it. The aunt confirmed there was nothing in there except for equipment used in the restaurant. They returned reluctantly. Tong was shocked seeing X's food looked like bloody meat. Unfamiliar with wild food, Tong tried it after X insisted. As he was about to eat, he saw images of the meat turning into worms. He screamed and dropped the spoon. X complained Tong needn't make a scene if scared. Tong insisted he really saw it. After arguing, Tong refused to eat and let X handle it. Tong decided to take a bite, but saw images, and the meat turned into worms. He screamed, dropping the spoon. X complained Tong was overreacting, but Tong insisted he saw it. After arguing, Tong refused to eat, leaving X to handle it. Back at their accommodation, they went to sleep. As the walls were thin, Tong heard X coughing. Worried, Tong shouted, but X didn't respond. Then he heard cries for help, and loud knocking echoing through the night. After arguing for a while, Tong decided not to eat the food in front of him, and let X handle that dish all by himself. After returning to their accommodation, they went to separate rooms. Tong heard heavy coughing from X's room through the thin walls. Worried, he shouted, but X didn't respond. Tong then heard cries for help and loud knocking. Scared, he shouted again, but suddenly all noises stopped. X then asked why Tong was making a fuss. Confused, Tong said he heard cries and coughing, but X insisted he wasn't coughing or calling for help, telling Tong to stop. Shocked and puzzled, Tong decided to believe X and eventually fell asleep. Tong felt scared in the strange situation and called for X, but everything went silent. X's voice then asked why Tong was making a fuss. Tong, confused, said he heard cries for help and coughing, but X denied it, telling Tong not to call out again. Shocked and puzzled, Tong decided to believe X and fell asleep. The next morning, Tong and X went to their internship, where villagers reported a missing girl. Pebois assigned X to announce the search and Tong to gather news with Pitum. That day, Tong and X were busy and didn't see each other. When Tong returned late, X's motorcycle was gone, and X didn't answer his calls. The next morning, both Tong and X headed to the station for their internship early in the morning, only to find that some villagers had come to ask for help. Because their daughter had gone missing after leaving home for school, Pebois received the villagers' request and assigned X to take it to the station staff to announce the search for the missing person, while telling Tong to follow Pitum, another staff member, to gather news outside. That day, both Tong and X were busy with their own tasks, so they didn't see each other at all. By the time Tong finished his news report and returned to the station, it was already very late. When he got back, he found that X's motorcycle was gone. So, he called X to confirm that he had arrived at the accommodation, but no matter how hard he tried, X didn't answer. After standing on the phone for a while, I decided to ride my motorbike back to my accommodation alone. While driving back, Tong happened to come across a high school girl, standing by the dark, lonely road. Concerned, he stopped to ask if she needed help, and offered to give her a ride. In Tong's mind, the girl seemed a bit strange. She was quiet and didn't say much, and her tone was a bit off. However, he chose to overlook it, thinking that she might just be wary of him because he was a guy. After asking each other, Tong learned the girl was trying to find her way home. This made Tong think of the missing child case that morning. He told a woman had come to the station looking for her daughter. If was her daughter, he'd take her home. The girl seemed wary of him. Tong offered his phone to call home. Before she could call, X's phone rang, interrupting. Tong answered and asked about the missing child. Before Tong could say he found the girl, X said the woman's daughter had gone home. Tong was confused and turned to confirm with but she had vanished. As Tong was about to answer the call, X interrupted him, saying that the daughter of the middle-aged woman who had contacted the station that morning had already returned home. Tong was confused for a moment, and intended to turn to the girl beside him, to confirm who was, but when he looked back, had vanished. In the midst of the lonely, dimly lit road, with dense woods on both sides and no turnoffs, the girl had mysteriously disappeared. Realizing that he had gotten himself into something strange, Tong quickly started his motorcycle and sped back to the accommodation. It turned out that, when he turned to look, had vanished. In the midst of a long, desolate road shrouded in darkness, with dense woods on both sides, and no turnoffs, the girl mysteriously vanished. Realizing that he had stumbled into something strange, Tong quickly started his motorcycle and sped back to the accommodation. After meeting with X, Tong shared his encounter, and X mentioned a similar incident at the station. Pebois had told him about a man who came looking for his missing daughter. That night, a girl appeared at the station, and an officer offered her a ride home. On the way, the air grew colder, and when the officer looked back, he saw her face covered in blood, realizing she was dead. Afterward, many officers saw her ghost, leading them to hold a merit-making ceremony and set up a spirit house. Tong felt scared, grateful he hadn't taken the girl in his car. They chatted while waiting for lunch. When their noodles arrived, X complained they were bland, but Tong found them spicy, disagreeing with X. The atmosphere around them gradually grew colder, and when the officer turned to look, he found that the girl's face was drenched in blood. That's when he realized that she was already dead. After that night, many officers at the station continued to see that girl, and they couldn't take it anymore, so they decided to hold a merit-making ceremony and set up a spirit house. The situation calmed down after that. After hearing the story, Tong felt scared and was glad he hadn't picked up the girl. They chatted while waiting for lunch. When the noodles arrived, X complained they were bland, but Tong found them spicy. X refused to eat after a few complaints. Concerned, Jenny asked if X would be okay without food, but he planned to eat at Uncle Chum's, a place they found on a motorcycle ride. Tong warned him about the cleanliness and strange food there, but X insisted the food was good. He mentioned seeing a picture of the owner's daughter, and sensed the owner was displeased when he asked about her. After complaining a couple more times, X finally decided not to eat. Concerned for his friend who had to work all day, Jenny asked if X would be okay without eating, but X replied that he was fine, because he planned to have dinner at Uncle Chum's restaurant, which was the place they had stumbled upon during their motorcycle ride that night. Upon hearing that, Tong warned X out of concern, thinking that Uncle Chum's restaurant wasn't very clean, since it mostly served raw and strange wild food. However, X seemed to listen but didn't pay much attention to the warning. He insisted that the food at the restaurant was really good, and mentioned that he happened to see a picture of the owner's daughter. But when he asked about the owner, he sensed that the owner wasn't pleased, so he didn't ask any further. We had to nod and listen to the power of words for a few more words before we both went our separate ways to do our work. That evening, they still went out to eat at Uncle Chum's restaurant, while Tong chose to stay home alone. As the night wore on, Tong had strange dreams about X. In his dream, he saw X sitting and eating someone's hand in a room. Feeling uneasy, the next morning, Tong called X to work and noticed X's t-shirt with bloodstains. When he asked X, Tong stayed quiet. After their argument, their relationship deteriorated. X became withdrawn, making mistakes and getting scolded. This continued until one day, Tong checked X's room but didn't find him. Given their strained relationship, Tong thought X went to work early and drove to the station. Only when I asked X and Metha, who were both furious, did I have to keep quiet. But after that argument that morning, the relationship between X and Tong started to deteriorate. X began to change from being a friendly person to someone who was quiet and withdrawn. From being a good worker, he started making mistakes and getting scolded multiple times. This continued until one day, when Tong went to check on X in his room as usual, but he couldn't find him. Tong thought X went to work early, so he drove to the station, but couldn't find him. He then went to Uncle Chum's restaurant, where X often went. Tong saw X's motorcycle outside. The restaurant was more rundown than he remembered. But when he arrived at the station, he found a puzzling truth. Not only could he not find X, but none of the other station staff had seen him either. Tong was asked to go look for his friend and tried calling X multiple times, but no matter how hard he tried, X wouldn't pick up. Then Tong thought that X might be at Uncle Chum's restaurant, where he liked to go every night. So, he decided to ride his motorcycle along the familiar path until he found the restaurant in the same spot as he remembered. Outside the restaurant, X's motorcycle was there, just as Tong guessed. However, the restaurant wasn't as he remembered. Tong had visited once, recalling it was old, but not as run down as now. The building seemed long abandoned. Inside, Tong found worn-out furniture and disrepair. He noticed a broken mirror with a dusty family photo of the owner, his wife, and their daughter, smiling. The girl was the mysterious girl Tong met earlier. Suddenly, Tong's phone rang. It was X, calling frantically. X said he was in the storage room of Uncle Chum's restaurant, where Tong had seen blood before. X explained Uncle Chum had captured him. A family photo showed the restaurant owner, his wife, and their daughter smiling. Tong realized the girl was the mysterious girl he met earlier. Tong's phone rang. It was X calling. X said he was in Uncle Chum's storage room, where Tong saw blood. X explained Uncle Chum captured. It turned out the girl was whom Tong met. Suddenly, Tong's phone rang. When he picked it up, he realized it was X calling. Tong picked up and heard X's voice. X said he was in the storage room at Uncle Chum's, the same room where Tong had seen blood before. X explained Uncle Chum captured him, and he kidnapped Uncle Chum's daughter. X urged Tong to hurry. When Tong entered the storage room, he found it empty. Tong asked X to pinpoint his location, but X insisted he was in that room. After asking each other repeatedly, Tong heard X's screams. Tong calmed himself, then got on his motorcycle and drove to the station with the family photo. X revealed that he was the one who had kidnapped Uncle Chum's daughter, and he urged Tong to hurry and come help him. However, when Tong entered the storage room, he found it to be just an empty, abandoned space. Tong tried to get X to pinpoint his exact location, but X kept insisting that he was indeed in that storage room. This left both of them in a very tense situation. After trying to ask each other repeatedly, the last sound Tong heard from the other end was X's desperate cries before the call was cut off. Tong panicked, rushed back to the station with a photo and showed it to Pibua. Pibua confirmed the man was looking for his daughter. Tong learned the couple had died long ago after their daughter was killed by a customer. As soon as he arrived at the station, he ran straight to Pabua to ask about the story of the father who had come looking for his daughter, showing him the photo. Pabua confirmed that the man in the picture was indeed the one searching for his daughter. Tong then asked where he could find that man to help X, as his friend had requested. Pabua hesitated for a moment, seeming reluctant to share, but when pressed, he finally spoke up. The answer from Phaibua was so heart-stopping. When Phaibua confirmed that the 3 wives had died a long time ago, Phaibua began to explain that the whole story happened after the daughter of the 3 wives had gone missing. After searching for many days, they discovered the truth that the daughter of the 3 wives had been tricked and killed by a customer in the shop. After knowing the truth, the 3 wives were so sad that they both began to search for the perpetrator. The husband would capture the suspected customers and torture them to extract the truth until they died. Then, he would use the flesh of those customers to cook meals for other customers. This cycle continued for a while until both the husband and wife decided to take their own lives. I realized I was dealing with spirits, not real people, and X might have entered the spirit world, explaining why I couldn't find him. Despite my fear, I rode my motorcycle down the road where I met again. I saw on that desolate road, knowing she wasn't alive. I offered to take her home to end the tragedy. Um's face behind me transformed into a ghost, her body decaying and bloody. Tong wanted to help his friend, so he gathered courage and rode his motorcycle down the road where he met again, seeing her on that desolate road. Tong knew wasn't alive, so he offered to take her home to end the tragedy. Meanwhile, X struggled against Uncle Chum's spirit, fighting his fear to bring back. On the motorcycle, Um's face turned ghostly, her body decaying and bloody. Tong had to be brave to get her home. Just before reaching their destination, Tong was hit by a car. Injured, he still managed to take to her destination, saving X. Uncle Chum's family spirits reunited and faded, leaving X and Tong to escape the restaurant. But outside, X saw a shocking sight, a police officer's body on the road. X realized his friend had already died before he went in to help. His struggle to save his friend was his last effort to keep his promise. Just before reaching their destination, Tong was hit by a car. Despite his injuries, he managed to take to her destination, saving X. Uncle Chum's family spirits reunited and faded, leaving X and Tong to escape the restaurant. When X got out, he saw a police officer's body on the road. X realized his friend had died before helping him. The struggle to save his friend was his last promise. The black ant asked about the body, and it was confirmed to be Tong's. The caller seemed to be Tong, but it was X. The black ant was stunned. When the fog cleared, Maud brought food to the black ant, but M realized his friend had passed before he tried to help. The black ant asked if anyone was seen on the ground, confirmed as Tong's body. One might think the caller was Tong, but it was X. The black ant was shocked. When the fog cleared, Maud brought food, but found something unexpected that made Maud's face pale. It was a joke from Hong, who didn't want the black ant to clear things up. Meanwhile, a red light shone from a room. When it got to this point, the black ant asked if he had seen anyone on the ground, and they confirmed that the body was Tong's. It seemed like the caller was Tong, but in reality, it was X. The black ant felt shocked. Maud brought food to the black ant, but he found something odd in the black ant's food. He told the black ant that the lunchbox didn't have a spoon. Hong didn't want the black ant to clear things up before getting a spoon. Meanwhile, in one of the rooms in the building, a red light shone out, along with the shadow of a person standing and doing something. Oh, it turned out that in Maud Dam's belongings, there was something unexpected that made the doctor go pale, before telling Maud Dam that the lunchbox didn't have a spoon, and that was just a joke from Hong, as he didn't want Maud Dam to clear things up before going out to get a spoon for him. Meanwhile, in one of the rooms in the building, a red light shone out, along with the shadow of a person standing and doing something.